My name is Henrietta Lawson, and after 37 years as the head librarian at Riverbridge Public Library, they threw me a retirement party. Well, they called it a party. There were white roses on every table, the kind my late husband used to bring home when we were still pretending we mattered to each other. There was a cake with my name spelled correctly, which was already more than I expected, and there was a microphone set up near the punch bowl, though I was never invited to speak into it. I sat at the center table like a display vase someone forgot to move after redecorating. People smiled, they took photos, but none of it felt real. Not to me. It wasn't until later, much later, though, that I realized some parties aren't celebrations. They're stages. And sometimes, you're just the prop. I had kept quiet for years about the $100 million prime lakefront land my late sister, a steel-hearted real estate mogul, left me in her will. The deed came in a thick cream envelope sealed with her signature and spite. It sat in the back of my filing cabinet, untouched, unseen, unspoken. No one in the family knew, not my son. Certainly not my daughter-in-law, Amelia. And thank heavens I kept it that way. Because halfway through the so-called party, just after the city councilwoman gave a speech about legacy and dignity, the doors opened, and in walked Amelia. She wasn't holding flowers, she wasn't holding a gift, she was holding the arm of a man in a gray suit and crimson tie, a lawyer. Every conversation in the room faded like fog in sunlight. Peter, my son, looked as though he'd just swallowed marbles. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Amelia walked straight to my table and smiled with all her teeth, not 1 ounce of warmth in that smile. "Hi, Mom," she said, placing a manila folder in front of me. "Since this is such a big moment, your transition into retirement, Peter and I thought it's time we helped you with everything." The lawyer beside her opened the folder, turning it so I could see. "Just standard authorization, really," she continued. "We'd be co-managing your accounts, your properties, all the essentials. It's only fair. You've worked so hard. Time to let us carry the load." Peter flinched at the word co-managing, but he said nothing. He still wouldn't look at me. I picked up the folder. The weight of it wasn't heavy, but the silence that followed was. It pressed against my ribcage like a forgotten bruise. They didn't know. They thought they were here to claim control of what little they assumed I had. My modest house, my pension, maybe the retirement fund. They had no idea that I held the deed to one of the last undeveloped lakefront parcels in the state, gifted quietly by a woman who never did anything quietly. Except this. I set the folder down without opening it. "I already have legal counsel," I said calmly. "If anything needs signing, you can forward it to Judith Kemp." The lawyer blinked. Amelia's jaw tightened. Peter finally raised his eyes and saw me, really saw me for the first time in years. You talked to a lawyer already?" he asked, voice thin. I nodded. I didn't need to say when. They didn't need to know I had prepared for this moment 5 years ago, not because I expected betrayal, but because I'd already lived it once. Amelia forced a smile again. "Of course. No rush. We just thought we'd save you the hassle." She picked up the folder, gave a tight nod to the lawyer, and walked away, her heels echoing across the parquet floor like a countdown. No one clapped. No one asked questions. The music resumed, but the party was already over. For them. Not for me. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen while the cake dried out on the counter. I looked at the family photo we took years ago, before the wedding, before the mask slipped, before I learned the most painful truths aren't shouted. They're signed in ink and passed in silence. I pressed my hand gently over the envelope in my locked drawer, the one with the deed, still unopened by anyone else, and I whispered to no one in particular. There are parties that feel like traps wrapped in compliments, but you still smile, you still show up. Because someday, when the curtain falls, you'll be the only one holding the script, If you've ever sat through a celebration that wasn't really for you, or kept quiet just long enough to keep your dignity intact, you'll understand what came next. Stay with me. The silence was only the beginning. The morning after the party, I found a bouquet of white lilies on my doorstep. No card, but I didn't need one. Amelia favored lilies the way some people favor wine, present in every occasion, regardless of appropriateness. I brought them in, filled a crystal vase I hadn't used in years, and placed them on the kitchen counter. They stared at me like elegant little lies. At noon, a cake was delivered. Chocolate hazelnut, my favorite. The note this time had Amelia's handwriting. Just a small thank you for everything you've done. Rest and enjoy, Mom. We're here for you. It was signed with a smiley face. Amelia never used emoticons. The next day, it was a box of teas and a silk shawl. Then candles. Then handmade soaps. It went on like that for a week. Gifts stacked neatly beside my door like offerings to a temple no one truly believed in. I tried not to read too much into it. After all, kindness shouldn't always be suspect. But on the 8th day, her real message arrived, hidden behind the softness of a fruit basket. She called in the early evening, voice like honey left too long in the sun. "Hi, Mom. Just checking in. Did you get the peaches?" "They're organic," I said I had. I thanked her. "Peter and I were talking," she went on too casually. "It must be so much work maintaining that big house all alone, and winters are rough out there. Maybe it's time we found you something a bit easier." I didn't respond. She filled the silence. "We were thinking, what if we sold the house and you moved closer to us? Just a little condo near our neighborhood. It'd be perfect. You could walk to the park. We'd stop by for dinner. You'd see the grandkids all the time I closed my eyes. Not because I was tired, but because I didn't want to see the trap before she finished setting it. Of course, it's totally up to you," she added quickly. "We just want what's best." That last sentence landed cold. I'd heard it before, from insurance agents, realtors, and surgeons. It never meant what people thought it did. After we hung up, I sat for a long while in the living room, surrounded by the things they wanted me to give up. My bookshelves lined with stories I never had time to read. The grandfather clock my husband once fixed with trembling hands. The firewood stacked neatly by the hearth, just waiting for autumn. I got up and walked slowly to the mantel. There, between a brass lamp and a faded wedding photo, sat the one face I trusted still. Clarice, my older sister. My contradiction. A woman who built empires in silence and wore her ambition like red lipstick. People called her cold. They didn't see the way she used to braid my hair every morning before school, or how she'd leave yellow Post-it notes in my coat pocket whenever I had a hard day ahead. When she died, suddenly, fiercely, I found a letter in her safety deposit box, along with the deed. Her handwriting was still sharp as ever. "Don't tell anyone yet. You'll know when the time is right. Observe first." She always said that. Observe first. I stared at her portrait, her eyes unblinking and full of memory. "You were always 5 moves ahead," I whispered. "I'm trying, Clarice." I really am. I could still hear her voice from childhood, coaching me through a chess game. If they're too eager to give, Henrietta, ask what they plan to take. I turned from the photo and looked out the window. Across the street, Peter's SUV was parked too neatly, one tire just barely kissing the curb. He didn't come in. He hadn't, not since the party. I thought back to when he was small, how he used to run through this house in mismatched socks, how he'd press wildflowers into my palm and call it treasure, how his laughter once shook these walls more than any storm ever did. Now he stood in the shadow of a woman who calculated kindness and weighed affection by its ROI. I wasn't angry, not even disappointed, just quietly devastated. Not because they wanted the house, not even because they assumed I'd just hand it over, but because they saw me as a relic, something to archive, manage, and eventually liquidate. I walked back to the kitchen, past the lilies, the cake, the tea, and I finally realized it was a gift. Every single item had come with strings, delicate, invisible threads, pulling me towards something I hadn't agreed to. That night, I wrote a letter to my attorney, Judith Kemp. Just a short one. No details yet. Just a note to say, let's have lunch soon. There may be documents I'll need you to safeguard. No one else needed to know what those documents were. Not yet, because I was still watching, still observing, and I'd only just begun. Last Thursday, Peter called me on video chat. The screen lit up with his name, and for a moment, I felt a strange flicker of hope. He asked how I was, if I needed groceries, if the heating was working, all the polite things. I answered with all the polite responses, but halfway through a sentence, right as I mentioned the new book I was reading, he looked off screen. I heard Amelia's voice in the background, sharp, distracted. Then he smiled awkwardly and said, "Mom, I've got to go. I'll call you later." The screen went black before I could even say goodbye. I waited 10 minutes, then 20. I even refreshed the app, thinking maybe it was a glitch. It wasn't. That was 3 days ago. No follow-up call, no text, just silence, padded by the thin excuse of busyness. And today is my birthday. 69, I didn't expect a party, but I thought I'd at least hear from him. Instead, the only buzz on my phone was a pharmacy reminder to refill my calcium supplements. The day passed quietly, broken only by the sound of wind pressing against the windows like an old friend trying to come in. I made myself tea, the same green ceramic mug I'd used since Peter was in college. Around 4 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. For a moment, my heart betrayed me. It leapt. But when I opened the door, there was no Peter, no Amelia, just Ivy. She stood there in her oversized hoodie, earbuds dangling around her neck, holding a small paper bag. "Dad asked me to drop this off," she muttered. "It's soup." "From that organic place you like," I thanked her. She didn't make eye contact. As she turned to leave, I heard it, barely above the wind. "Bye, Grandma." Not warm, not cold, just habitual, like muscle memory. Something she used to say with joy, now recited without emotion. I stood there long after the gate closed. I wasn't angry with her. She was 15, trying to grow up in a house where softness was seen as weakness, where silence was considered efficient, not cruel. But I missed her voice when she was 6, full of sticky-fingered affection and endless questions. I carried the soup inside and placed it gently on the kitchen counter. I didn't open it. Instead, I sat in the armchair by the window, the same one I used to rock Peter in when he had fevers. The house was quiet, not peaceful quiet, the kind of quiet that screams underneath. There's a myth about old age, about how it comes gradually, like dusk. But in my experience, it came like a slammed door. One day, you're being asked for advice and recipes, and the next, you're just asked to stay out of the way. People don't always say it, but their absence does. I used to be the rhythm of this house. I made meals at 7, paid bills on the 1st, cleaned bathrooms on Tuesdays, folded sheets the way my mother taught me. I knew everyone's schedules better than they did. When Peter got married, I gave them space. I didn't want to be that mother-in-law. I left the guest room untouched, hoping they'd visit often. I remember the first year. They came over every Sunday for lunch. Ivy was just a baby. Amelia used to smile more then, or maybe I just thought she did. The second year, it became once a month. By the third, I was lucky to see them on birthdays. Even then, there were always exit plans. "We'll just stay an hour, Mom. We've got dinner plans." "Ivy has a recital." "Peter's got a call." There were always calls, especially when their father fell ill. He spent the last year of his life in this house, bedridden, in pain, fading, and I was here, alone, nursing him through every fever, changing sheets soaked in sweat, lifting him into wheelchairs, feeding him spoonfuls of broth when his hands shook too much to hold anything. Peter came twice that year, once with flowers, once for 5 minutes wearing a suit on his way to a meeting. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said both times. "It's just... things are complicated." They weren't. Not really. He had made choices, just not me. Now, years later, this house has settled into a rhythm without footsteps. Ivy drops by when she's told to. Amelia sends gifts with expiration dates. Peter drifts further into silence. And me? I've grown used to the echo. But that doesn't mean I don't feel it. The world assumes aging means shrinking. But the truth is, I haven't disappeared. I've just been buried beneath schedules and silence, beneath good intentions and forgotten birthdays, beneath the belief that my time has passed. But I'm still here, still breathing, still remembering, still watching. I used to be the root that held this whole family upright, but everyone only saw the tree and forgot I was there, holding it steady beneath the soil. I traced a finger along the frame of Clarice's photo again. "I haven't spoken yet," I whispered, "but I will. And this time, they'll all hear it." It was just after 9 when the phone rang. I remember the hour clearly because I had just settled into my chair with a small cup of chamomile. The tea was still steaming, the room still cloaked in the soft hush of evening. The name Amelia blinked on my screen. I hesitated. For the briefest second, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but old habits die hard. So I answered. "Hello?" "Hi, Mom," she said, crisp and direct. Not unkind, but far from warm. No small talk, no asking how I'd slept, what I'd eaten, or if I'd finished. The puzzle I left on the table weeks ago. She got straight to it. "I wanted to talk about your living situation." I kept silent. Silence is underrated. People reveal more when they fill the silence themselves. You're living alone in a house that's, frankly, too big for one person. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, all those stairs. It worries Peter and me, does it? I wanted to ask. Or is it the property value that keeps you up at night? She continued before I could speak. "We just think it's time to consider your long-term care. I mean, God forbid anything happens, but have you thought about who would make decisions for you?" Still, I said nothing. She paused, maybe hoping I'd agree. I didn't. So she tried a different tack. "There's a legal document I can send over. It's called a durable power of attorney. It's simple. You'd name someone, ideally Peter, to manage your finances if something ever came up." I watched the steam rise from my tea, swirling, fading. "Nothing would change right away," she added quickly. "It's just a precaution. Lots of families do it. It's responsible. It's also convenient, I thought, for her, for Peter, for anyone who's been circling this house like it was already halfway emptied." I took a slow breath. "Amelia," I said calmly, "have I ever asked you to manage anything for me?" There was silence. Then, "It's not about that." But it was. We both knew. "I appreciate your concern," I said, measured, "but if there's ever a need for legal assistance, I have someone I trust." She didn't answer immediately. I imagined her frowning, perhaps biting her lip in frustration, her well-rehearsed pitch beginning to unravel. "Well," she said finally, "at least think about it." "I will," I said, but not the way she hoped. After we hung up, I stared at the blank screen of my phone for a while. Then, without another thought, I opened the drawer beside my chair and pulled out the old leather address book, the kind with pages yellowed at the corners, names scribbled in ink that had started to fade. Under K was a name I hadn't dialed in years, Judith Kemp, the woman who once stood beside my sister Clarice through more legal storms than I could count. Clarice always said Judith had a spine made of steel and a memory sharper than most machines, and she never forgot a promise. I called. The phone didn't ring more than twice. "Henrietta," she said, her voice warm but alert, like she'd been expecting the call all along. It's been a long time, I replied. Not long enough to forget your voice. I smiled despite myself. I need your help. Tell me everything. And so I did. About the party. The surprise lawyer. The floral arrangements followed by veiled threats. The contract dressed up as care. The daughter-in-law who smiled with her teeth but not her eyes. When I finished, there was a beat of silence. Then Judith said matter-of-factly, I think it's time we had a proper conversation. In person, I thought you'd say that. I'll be in town Wednesday. You free for lunch? Of course. And Henrietta? Yes. Thank heavens you kept quiet. I laughed softly. That's what Clarice would have said. Judith didn't laugh. She did more than say it. She built a legal wall so high even vultures like Amelia will break their wings trying to scale it. That made me smile, but only for a moment, because I knew. Walls don't keep people from knocking, and they don't stop ambition, but they do buy time. And sometimes, time is all a woman like me needs. I hung up and placed the phone on the table. The tea was cold now, but I didn't mind, because something else had warmed inside me. Not anger, not fear, but clarity. The kind that only comes when someone finally shows their cards, and you realize you've been holding the winning hand all along. It was a quiet Tuesday morning, just a month after Clarice's funeral, when the envelope arrived. No postmark, no return address, just my name, Henrietta M. Lawson, handwritten in that unmistakable looping script I hadn't seen in weeks, but would have recognized in the dark. Clarice had always said that timing was everything, and somehow, even in death, she was right on time. The envelope was thick, sealed with a wax stamp embossed with the outline of an owl, a symbol she'd always loved. Wisdom watches in silence, she used to say. I took it to the kitchen table, the same one where she and I used to sit with mugs of coffee, plotting our escape from childhood, and then, later in life, just trying to understand where everything had gone wrong. My hands trembled slightly as I broke the seal. Inside, a single sheet of parchment. Her handwriting danced across the page. If you're reading this, sister mine, it means I've slipped away before you. That thought used to frighten me, leaving you in this world without me. But lately, I've come to see it as the final gift I could give, a clean cut. No more apologies, no more compromises. Just the truth. I stopped there, letting the weight of her words settle. You remember the land, don't you? The 300 acres near the valley, the one we used to pass on the way to Grandma Ellis's cottage. It doesn't look like much from the roadside, but underneath that soil is history, minerals, zoning potential, and silence. Developers are swarming the region now. It's worth nearly $100 million and growing. My breath caught. I had thought Clarice sold that land years ago, back when her health had started to decline. I remember asking her once, and she'd simply smiled and said, "Some things aren't meant for the world to know." And now I understood. I bought that land in secret, under a quiet trust. I never told anyone, not my lawyers, not the press, not even the board. Only Judith Kemp helped me handle it. She's the only one I trust. If you're reading this, she'll have already arranged everything, exactly as I requested. I turned the letter over, expecting more. There was. You're the sole heir, Henrietta. The land is yours. But if you value your peace, your life, and your freedom, keep it hidden. Don't speak of it. Don't boast. Don't try to turn it into something public. People circle wealth like vultures circle carcasses. This land will be your salvation, but only if it stays invisible. I closed my eyes. I could hear her voice so clearly in my head. Calm, deliberate, knowing. If you are still alive in this world of masks and maneuvers, then silence will keep you free. Remember this. The loud ones fall first, but the quiet ones? We endure. I folded the letter slowly, as if folding a piece of her back into my life. Judith had confirmed everything not long after. The paperwork was impeccable. The trust that held the land was under a name that didn't even trace back to Clarice. The transfers had been airtight, protected by layers of legal armor. I wasn't listed as an owner, just the beneficiary of a quiet, anonymous entity. Not even Peter or Amelia knew, especially not Peter or Amelia. Clarice had watched them, quietly from the sidelines of family dinners and holiday brunches, the way she used to observe boardroom rivals. She once said to me after Thanksgiving, "There's a difference between ambition and hunger. Peter's not ambitious, he's starving, and she's feeding it." At the time, I'd brushed it off, thought she was being too hard on him, too cynical. But as I sat there at my table, rereading the letter in the hush of morning, I realized she hadn't been cynical. She'd been precise. And her final gift to me was not the land. It was the silence, the space to move, to wait, to choose, to protect something without needing to prove it existed. I tucked the letter into a wooden box beneath my bed, the one I'd lined with lavender sachets and old photographs, the one even Ivy didn't know about. I never spoke a word of it to anyone, not even when Peter brought up how expensive the property taxes must be. Not when Amelia asked, casually, if I was thinking about selling that extra lot near the valley. I had smiled, shrugged, pretended to forget what land they meant, because Clarice was right. Silence is not weakness. It's the last gate that guards your freedom, the only thing that keeps a woman like me from being swallowed by other people's appetites. So I stayed quiet until the day the party came and Amelia arrived with a man in a gray suit and a folder filled with assumptions. Even then, I kept my voice even, my face calm, because when you hold something as powerful as a secret, you don't need to raise your voice, you just need to listen to who's reaching, who's pushing, and who's silently counting on your silence to hand them the world. Peter hadn't. Called in weeks when the invitation came. A message, short, unemotional. "Amelia and I would love to have you over for dinner. Friday night, just us. Ivy will be at a sleepover." I hesitated, rereading the words like they were printed in a different language. Just us. The phrase felt unusually curated, like a house staged too perfectly for a showing. But I went, partly because I wanted to believe the intention was pure, mostly because by now I'd learned that people tell you everything you need to know when you let them serve the meal. Their house smelled like cinnamon and ambition. The candles flickered like stage lights, casting soft golden glows on Amelia's carefully arranged centerpiece. White tulips, her favorite. She greeted me in a silk blouse and a rehearsed smile. Peter hovered nearby, his hand resting on the back of her chair like a footnote. The dinner began with a glass of red wine and small talk. "How's the garden, Mom? Still keeping up with your book club?" They never used to call me Mom like that, with the measured tone of someone addressing a client. The salad was perfect. Arugula, shaved Parmesan, cranberries, my favorite, which Peter hadn't remembered in years. But Amelia had. She always did her homework. By the time the roast was served, the conversation had shifted from the weather to how the neighborhood is really changing and how real estate is moving fast these days. I chewed slowly, letting their words simmer in my mind. There was a moment just before dessert when Peter reached for my hand across the table. It startled me. He used to do that when he was young, when he was scared of thunderstorms or bad grades. But tonight, it felt like a prompt. "We just want to make sure you're comfortable, Mom. And taken care of. You've done so much for us." I looked at him, into those same green eyes I'd once held against my chest during night terrors. But they weren't looking at me. They were waiting. Amelia rose gracefully, a stack of documents in her manicured hands. "We've been thinking, maybe it would be best, for convenience and safety, if we jointly owned your house." she said, laying the folder beside my wine glass. That way, if repairs come up or if you ever need anything, we're legally allowed to step in. The folder was lavender, smooth, branded, pre-notarized tabs sticking out like tiny white flags. She smiled as she said it, like she was offering me dessert. It's not permanent. Just a precaution, I set my fork down. There was a sharp hum in the back of my ears, not from rage, but from recognition. The same sound you hear when a fluorescent light buzzes in an empty office long after the real work has ended. I didn't raise my voice, didn't ask them to explain, didn't accuse. Instead, I reached for my purse, slowly, calmly, unsnapped it, pulled out my wallet. I laid it gently on the table, the soft leather pressing into the linen, tablecloth. They watched me, confused. Then I stood. I think I'm full, I said, brushing my napkin onto the plate. Full of dinner, and pretense Peter looked down. Amelia froze. We're just trying to help, Henrietta, she said, her voice tight. Of course you are, I nodded, and I appreciate the effort. But I believe I'll finish dessert. At home. Neither of them moved as I walked to the door. I didn't slam it. I didn't even close it quickly. Some silences aren't meant to be filled. They're meant to echo. That night, the house felt heavier than usual. Not haunted, not sad, just dense. Like it had finally absorbed the weight of every polite betrayal that had happened within its walls. I walked into my study, pulled the thin chain of the brass desk lamp, and watched its warm glow spill across the old oak table. Dust danced in the air, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't brush it away. Some things needed to be seen before they were cleared. I reached under the drawer and pulled out the black binder labeled in my sister's handwriting, Lighthouse. That was Clarice's nickname for the land, not because it had a lighthouse, but because she said it saved her in the dark. Inside the binder were notes, handwritten letters, legal attachments. Every conversation I had with Judith Kemp was logged in here. Dates, terms, even contingency clauses. I flipped through them slowly, like touching stones across a riverbed, searching for footing. My old laptop whirred awake with the fatigue of time. I opened a secure folder titled Inheritance Trust, Kemp. And then I began. Clause by clause, I reviewed the trust Clarice had left. Notarized and anonymized through an offshore holding entity, per Judith's design. Not even Peter knew of its existence. Not even the name of the land, which we had renamed under a quiet title action 5 years ago. Clarice had always known. Family can become greedy, Henrietta. But the law, when used right, can be your silence weapon. That voice echoed in my mind as I updated my will. I removed Peter as medical proxy. I revoked Amelia's name from all emergency contact forms. I transferred durable power of attorney to Judith's office. I assigned Ivy, my granddaughter, into a separate clause, a future trust, protected until adulthood if she ever needed it. And lastly, I issued a statement of directive. All real property gifted by Clarice M. Elwood shall remain unencumbered, protected under the Lighthouse Foundation, and shielded from all claims, familial or otherwise. By the time I finished, the cursor blinked like a heartbeat in the quiet room. Then I sent the entire packet to Judith's encrypted email. I paused, then picked up the phone. Not my cell. My landline, the one no one remembered I had. I dialed a number by memory. Judith answered after 2 rings. Henrietta, she said. Calm, like we'd spoken yesterday. It's done, I said simply. How do you feel? Not angry, I replied. Just ready. Then I'll proceed on my end. I heard her tap a keyboard. Are you prepared if they push back? She asked. Yes. Emotionally too, especially emotionally. A beat passed. Then she asked, gently, almost affectionately, Are you ready to stop surviving and start owning again? I looked around the room, at the binders, the fading photo of Clarice, the untouched bookshelf I once meant to donate. Then I smiled. Not to fight, I said, but to finally claim the space I still breathe in. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, that's all I needed to hear. I hung up. Then I opened a drawer, pulled out a crisp envelope from a legal stationery company, addressed it carefully. To Riverside Law Group, Amelia L. Lawson and Peter Lawson. Revocation of financial authority requests. Inside, I enclosed a formal letter from a new legal office, unaffiliated with Judith's for insulation, stating clearly, our client, Mrs. Henrietta Lawson, declines to enter any power of attorney or shared ownership agreement. Please forward all future legal communications to our office. Any further solicitation may be considered undue pressure. It was tactful, unemotional, legally sound, but more importantly, it was quiet. No confrontation, no raised voices, just boundaries. I sealed it, affixed the stamp, and left it on the hallway console to mail first thing in the morning. As I turned off the light and walked upstairs, I didn't feel triumphant or rebellious. I felt balanced. There was still so much ahead, but for the first time in years, I was no longer reacting. I was setting the terms, silently. It was a Tuesday morning just after sunrise when I heard the faint knock at the door. Not the hurried, impatient kind that Amelia made with her manicured fingers. This one was formal, respectful even. When I opened it, no one stood there. Just a courier envelope sitting on the welcome mat, the words "Priority Legal Mail" stamped in red across its face. I didn't have to open it to know who sent it. I'd seen enough legal packaging in my life to recognize the script. Still, I brought it in with the morning breeze, placed it gently on the kitchen counter, and made myself a cup of mint tea before touching it. One sip, then another. Only then did I reach for the envelope. The return address read, Everett & Cole LLP, Family Representation Division, on behalf of Mr. Peter Lawson and Mrs. Amelia Lawson. My hands were steady as I opened it. Inside, a letter spanning 3 pages, written in pleasant fonts and softened legal phrasing, but no amount of formatting could hide its meaning. We are writing to offer a proactive financial stewardship proposal, crafted with the sole intention of supporting the longevity, safety, and well-being of Mrs. Henrietta Lawson, our beloved mother and family, matriarch. The words were honeyed, but underneath they carried the sharp edge of control. Our clients propose a temporary co-management trust structure, wherein Mr. Peter Lawson, her son, will assist in overseeing significant financial transactions and property decisions to alleviate burden and ensure long-term stability. I paused. Significant financial transactions? The letter didn't specify the $100 million estate, but it didn't have to. Buried in the second paragraph was a polite nod to recent concerns regarding cognitive health and the risk of isolation for seniors living alone, and a bullet point list suggesting reasons why proactive steps may prevent future legal complications. I had to admire their finesse, concern masquerading as control, help dressed in the robes of gentle tyranny. I finished my tea, then read the letter again and again. Each time, my eyes stopped at a particular phrase. Our clients act out of love and duty, motivated by a desire to ensure safety, rather than pursue authority. Duty. Love. Such lovely words, so often used as shields for entitlement. I folded the letter neatly and set it aside. Then I pulled a fresh sheet of ivory stationery from my drawer, the kind I reserved for things that mattered. With my favorite ink pen, I wrote a single sentence in my own handwriting. There are people who say they're worried about you, but what they really fear is you remembering exactly what you own. I signed it simply, H. Then I placed the letter from Everett & Cole and my handwritten note into a new envelope and addressed it to Judith Kemp's office. I didn't need to tell her what to do. She would know. She always did. Judith had once said that the cleverest moves weren't made with noise, but with certainty. No statements, no panic, just clean, legal clarity. As I sealed the envelope, I thought about how many times Peter had forgotten my birthday, how many times Amelia had smiled while gently suggesting simplifying my affairs, and how many dinners I had sat through, feeling invisible at a table I once built with my bare hands. I walked the envelope to the mailbox at the end of the block. No fanfare, no hesitation. The wind rustled the leaves along the sidewalk, and I felt strangely calm. Back home, I lit a candle in the study and sat in my favorite chair by the window. The sun was now fully up, and the light poured across the bookshelf, illuminating the photograph of Clarice on the mantel. Her gaze, sharp as ever. "I kept it quiet, Clarice," I whispered, "just like you told me." I smiled gently, and then I waited for whatever their next move would be, because the thing about people like Amelia and Peter, they didn't know how to stop when power was just beyond reach. They mistook silence for surrender. But I had learned silence, when chosen, isn't weakness. It's a map. And I was following mine, one steady step at a time. There are certain afternoons that don't fade with time. I can still remember that one. Late autumn, somewhere between loss and acceptance. Clarice and I sat on the edge of the clearing, the tall grass whispering as the river beyond caught golden slivers of light. Her scarf fluttered in the wind, and her once commanding voice had softened into something raw and real. Clarice had been called many names in the business press over the years, some flattering, most not. But the one they all agreed on was the Riverfront Queen. She built her empire on vision and tenacity, buying swaths of undervalued land near the Eastern Water Corridor long before anyone believed in its potential. Men twice her age tried to outmaneuver her. None succeeded, until the day the markets cracked, and with them, her crown. It was a scandal, or so the media decided. A bad partnership, some deliberately sabotaged zoning deals, and a vicious board vote that saw her ousted from her own company. The headline screamed, "Collapse." But I saw something else. I saw my sister, still standing. That afternoon, months after everything fell apart, we sat side by side on one of the last parcels of land still under her personal title. It hadn't been touched, no fences, no development, just earth and wind and Clarice. She handed me a thermos of lukewarm coffee, then leaned back on her elbows. "I lost the headlines," she said. "I lost the buildings and the admiration." She turned to me with a faint smile. "But I kept one thing, Henny." Two, actually. I tilted my head, curious. "You," she said, "and this land." I didn't respond. Sometimes the deepest truths don't need echoing. She continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm leaving this place to you. Not because it's worth something, it will be someday, but that's not the point. I'm leaving it to you because you're the only one who never needed it to love me." I felt my throat tighten, but I kept my gaze on the horizon. "You never wanted my empire. You just wanted me to come to Sunday lunch, to stop and breathe." She chuckled then. "I didn't listen, of course." "No," I murmured. "You didn't." Her laughter faded into silence. Then she said, "Promise me you'll keep it quiet." "Why?" "Because there will come a day when silence protects you more than noise ever could." I remember nodding. That was the last time we sat on that land together. 3 weeks later, she collapsed during a panel at a regional planning conference, a heart she'd pushed too hard for too long. She was gone before the ambulance arrived. Back in my living room now, the present stretches out in stillness. The room smells of cedar and old books. Outside, branches tap against the windows like timid memories. I reach for the leather-bound ledger Clarice gave me 5 years ago, the one she told me never to throw away, even if it looked like nothing more than notes and doodles. Inside, the back cover, stitched into a secret fold, is the document I've only dared glance at twice before. I slip it out now. Certificate of Land Ownership Grantee, Clare Hart Foundation. Trustee Henrietta Lawson. Acreage 312 acres. Location Riverfront East Development. Corridor valuation last recorded $97.8 million. Everything is intact. The paper is crisp. The ink has not faded. The Claire Hart Foundation, named from a blend of Clarice's and my surnames. A quiet, legal shell Judith helped establish in the months before Clarice passed. A shell designed to protect the land, to separate it from any family name or prying interest. Peter doesn't know it exists. Amelia wouldn't understand it if she did. They talk about my health, my age, my diminishing capacity, as if I were wilting before their eyes. But they don't know that this land isn't just acreage. It's memory and love and dignity. It's a promise I made to my sister. I trace my fingers over Clarice's signature. A flood of her voice comes back, not in her business tone, but in that late afternoon murmur. I'm not giving you land, Henny. I'm giving you the one thing no one else could offer me in return: peace. I place the certificate back into the ledger, tuck it into the drawer beneath the window, and lock it with a quiet click. Some memories they try to rewrite, with convenience, with persuasion, with letters disguised as concern. But there are truths etched deeper than narrative, and I carry them in ink, in soil, and in silence. It was a Thursday afternoon when Amelia showed up unannounced, a Tupperware of something wrapped in a red checkered dish towel, and Ivy skipping beside her in sparkly sneakers. I hope it's not a bad time, she said, stepping across my threshold before I had a chance to say otherwise. She held up the container like a peace offering. Apple pie. Ivy and I baked it this morning. Thought you might want something sweet. Ivy beamed. I peeled the apples myself, Grandma. I offered a warm smile to the child. That's very kind of you, sweetheart. Come in. I led them into the kitchen, where the light fell soft through the lace curtains and the kettle had just begun to sing. We sat at the table where so many conversations in my life had shifted the winds, though none quite like what was brewing now. I sliced the pie. The crust was golden, uneven, real. Would you like whipped cream? I asked. No, thank you, Amelia said too quickly. Her eyes were already scanning the room, lingering just a second too long on the bookshelf where I kept my sister's photo, tucked among medical journals and poetry. She waited until Ivy was distracted with the coloring book I slid toward her. Your house is lovely, as always, Amelia said, taking a small bite of pie. I've always admired how timeless everything feels here. I gave a polite nod. She folded her napkin in half, then again, slower this time. You know, I've been thinking a lot about family lately, she began, her tone light but her gaze calculating, about how lineage and legacy shape the kind of life we build for our kids. I didn't speak. I let the silence stretch. People tend to reveal more when you give them space. She cleared her throat. You had a sister, didn't you? Clarice. I placed my fork down gently, wiped my fingers, and moved to pour tea. The sound of hot liquid hitting porcelain filled the pause between us. Yes, I said evenly. Clarice. She passed some years ago. Amelia leaned forward, feigning interest. I read about her once. She was very successful. Real estate, right? I nodded, setting her cup in front of her. She made a name for herself. And lost it. But that's not what made her memorable. Amelia's lips curved into a tight smile. I just meant she must have left behind something. Assets, maybe. Properties. Anything still in probate? My knife slid clean through the pie as I cut another slice. I placed it on a fresh plate for Ivy, who was now humming softly and coloring a sun. The things Clarice left, I said quietly, are exactly where she meant for them to be. Undisturbed, Amelia's smile stiffened. Of course. I only brought it up because, well, if there's anything you ever plan to share with Peter and me, this would be the safest time to do so. Legally, I mean. No confusion later. The bite in her voice was masked under honey. but it was there. I took my seat again, met her eyes without flinching. "I'm sure you think so," I said, brushing crumbs from my skirt. Ivy, unaware, held up her drawing, a tree with pink leaves and a crooked heart in the middle. "Do you like it, Grandma?" I smiled genuinely now. "I do. It's beautiful." Amelia glanced at the picture, but her attention was still anchored to me. She wasn't here to admire trees or pie. I turned my eyes to Ivy, still focused on her crayons, and then I said gently but clearly, "Children shouldn't have to unlearn love just because adults forget how to show it." Amelia blinked, confused. I let the words settle before I continued. "What I mean is, when children grow up hearing words soaked in greed, something shifts. They stop trusting silences. They start mistaking manipulation for care. And slowly, they forget how to listen to someone's heart instead of their wallet." Amelia didn't respond, but the corner of her mouth twitched. I stood and began gathering the dishes. "If there's something you're worried about, Amelia," I said without turning, "you should speak plainly." Not through pastry, she rose, adjusting her coat. "I only wanted to visit, to keep things open." "Doors are open," I replied, "for those who knock with sincerity." As she called to Ivy, who carefully packed her crayons, I saw the faintest flicker of unease in her posture. She hadn't gotten what she came for, and she knew I knew. When the door closed behind them, I leaned against it for a moment. In my house, a pie means comfort, but today, it tasted like warning. The phone rang just before 9. I had just set down my teacup when I heard the voice on the other end. "Mrs. Lawson? This is Craig from East Valley Community Bank. I'm calling to confirm the request to change the ownership on your savings account, ending in 4079. I blinked. "I'm sorry. Change the ownership?" "Yes, ma'am. The account is currently under your name, but we received an authorization form yesterday appointing Peter Lawson as the primary account holder. We just need verbal confirmation from you to finalize it." My heart stilled. I hadn't signed any such document. I hadn't even spoken to Peter in a week. "I never submitted that request," I said slowly. "I need you to place a hold on any changes." Immediately, the line went quiet for a moment. Yes, ma'am." "Of course. Would you like to schedule an in-person review?" "Yes," I said. "Today. I'll be there in an hour." I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I changed into a slate gray blouse, brushed my hair back into a low knot, and took my time. If I was going to walk into betrayal, I would do it standing tall. The bank lobby was calm. Muted jazz filtered through the air as a young man in a navy vest led me to a private room. He offered water. I declined. Craig, the man I'd spoken to on the phone, entered with a folder clutched to his chest like a shield. "We apologize for the confusion, Mrs. Lawson," he began carefully. "We received this form via email, supposedly signed by you and witnessed by your son." He handed it to me. My name was there, in neat cursive, but it wasn't mine. I stared at the signature. It mimicked the loops and curves of my real handwriting, but the angle was wrong, the pressure uneven. It was an impersonation, a forgery. Peter's name appeared beside it, as witness. The audacity of it hollowed out my stomach. "I want a copy of this," I said firmly. "Of course." "We flagged it for internal review. No changes will be made to your account until this is fully investigated." "Good," I replied, standing. "Now please print me a statement of all recent access attempts and note on file that no one is to touch my accounts without direct, in-person authorization." Not even my son Craig nodded quickly, already typing. As I walked out, I caught my reflection in the glass doors. The same woman, but something in the eyes had shifted. That night, Judith came over. We sat in my living room, my safe harbor of lace lampshades and old books, while I handed her the forged form. She read in silence. "Well," she said at last, "that crosses a line." "It erases the line entirely," I replied. She looked at me over her glasses. We'll file an immediate cease and desist, alert the fraud unit, and prepare a formal affidavit. I'll need to loop in a partner from the firm. If they tried it once, they'll try again. I nodded slowly. They didn't even wait for me to die, Judith. They just hoped I'd stay quiet long enough for them to get away with it. There was a long silence between us, the kind that fills the air when grief begins to mutate into something colder. Not rage, but resolve. I had held on to the benefit of the doubt longer than most would. I had told myself Amelia was simply opportunistic, that Peter was spineless, not malicious, that things would pass as they always did. But this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was strategy. This was theft disguised as concern, betrayal disguised as love. I pressed my palm over my heart, feeling the faint flutter there. They weren't just circling anymore. They had struck. Judith put down her glass. "We'll handle it," she said, "but you need to prepare yourself. If they think you're vulnerable, this is only the beginning." "I'm not vulnerable," I said, more to myself than to her. "I'm awake." She smiled faintly. "Then let's make sure they understand that, legally and permanently." We finalized the letters to the bank and to Everett and Cole, the firm representing Peter and Amelia. By morning, everything would be in motion. As I sat at my desk looking over the polished wood I'd had since Peter was a boy, I whispered something I hadn't dared say out loud in months. I'm not afraid of losing them anymore. Because somewhere along the line, I had already lost the version of them I loved. They weren't waiting for me to die. They were just hoping I'd stay silent a little longer. The school had sent a permission slip the week before, asking if I'd be willing to volunteer as a grandparent chaperone for Ivy's class picnic. I said yes, without hesitation. It was the first time in a long while that I'd be invited into a part of her world without Amelia filtering every word. The morning air was crisp, with just enough sun to warm the dew off the grass. Oaks stretched their limbs wide over the park, casting long shadows over benches and picnic tables. Laughter rang through the space, children running, chasing, tossing breadcrumbs to ducks near the pond. I spotted Ivy near the sandbox. She wore a floppy blue hat and her favorite cardigan with the rainbow buttons. When she saw me, her face lit up in that unfiltered way only children can manage. She ran straight into my arms. "Grandma!" Her little arms wrapped around my waist, and for a moment, everything else melted. No legal letters, no signatures forged. Just that one word, Grandma, and the weight of her leaning into me. We found a quiet spot under an old elm, slightly away from the chaos. Ivy pulled out her coloring book while I laid out the small lunch I'd brought for us. Jam sandwiches cut into hearts, carrot sticks, and slices of apple dusted with cinnamon. As we ate, she pointed to a page where she'd drawn a cluster of shapes. "What's this one, Grandma?" I squinted, smiling. That looks like a dragon hiding behind a mountain." She giggled. "It's a bunny in a blanket." We played our game of guess the scribble for a while, her giggles like wind chimes in spring. And then, as she reached for her juice box, I decided it was time for the question that had been sitting in my chest. "Ivy," I began softly, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, "can I ask you something?" She looked up with wide eyes. "Of course. If someone hid a very precious gem deep underground, so deep no one could find it easily, do you think other people should go dig it up?" She blinked. "Did someone lose it?" "No," I said gently. "It was hidden on purpose." To keep it safe, she considered that seriously, chewing on her lower lip. Then, "No. It's not theirs. It belongs to the person who hid it, right?" I smiled, my heart tugging gently in my chest. "Yes, that's what I believe too." She leaned into me, resting her head on my arm. "Some people want things just 'cause they're shiny." I chuckled. "You're wise beyond your years." We sat in silence for a bit, watching a little boy try to catch a butterfly and fail every time because he was too noisy in his excitement. I kept my gaze on Ivy's profile, so young, yet already bearing the instincts her parents seemed to have lost. "Does everyone in our family love shiny things?" she asked suddenly. Her question wasn't childish. It was laced with something far older. I took a breath. Sometimes grown-ups forget that not everything shiny is good. Sometimes they think owning something makes them better, safer, more important. But real treasures, I squeezed her hand, can't be bought. Or taken. She didn't speak, just looked at me with a solemnity that made me feel both proud and mournful. "Bunny," she said after a beat. I raised an eyebrow. "Pardon?" She flipped the page in her coloring book and pointed to another drawing. "Guess what this one is?" I laughed. "A bunny hiding behind a mountain?" She grinned. "Nope. A dragon wrapped in a blanket. I couldn't help it." I laughed out loud, a full, unfiltered sound that startled even me. Ivy giggled, pleased with herself. We ate the last bites of our sandwiches, and when it was time to pack up, she helped me fold the blanket neatly. As I stood to dust off my skirt, she slipped her hand into mine. "I like it when it's just us, Grandma," she whispered. "I do too, sweetheart." She paused before we joined the group. "Do shiny things make people stop loving?" I crouched to meet her eye level. "No, honey. But wanting shiny things too badly can make people forget how to love." Her eyes searched mine and something passed between us, something unspeakable, yet certain. She was listening. She understood more than anyone gave her credit for. As the teacher called them back for games, Ivy waved at me from the line. "Don't worry, Grandma," she called. "I'll help you guard the treasure." I pressed my hand to my chest, swallowing the knot in my throat. "Thank you," I mouthed. Sometimes the smallest allies are the fiercest, and sometimes wisdom lives not in courtrooms or ledgers, but in the hands of a child holding a crayon. Amelia invited me to lunch again. This time she chose a sleek little bistro downtown, a place with stark white walls, minimalist art, and a menu that felt more curated than cooked. I knew before I walked in that it wasn't about sandwiches or salads. She greeted me with a quick kiss on the cheek, all brightness and grace. But her eyes had the sheen of performance. And then I saw him, a man in his 30s, sharply dressed, seated already at the table. He stood as I approached. "This is Calvin Rowe," Amelia said lightly, gesturing. "He's with Hargrave Legal. Just a friendly consult, friendly." I nodded and took my seat. We ordered. Amelia a kale salad, I something I wouldn't touch. Calvin, coffee only. The pleasantries didn't last long. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a manila folder, sliding it across the table to me. "Mrs. Lawson, we've prepared a proposal. It's a standard document. A family settlement agreement." I didn't touch the folder. "A settlement for what exactly?" Amelia's voice softened, practiced. "We just want to resolve everything peacefully before any misunderstandings grow bigger." Calvin picked up smoothly. "If you agree to disclose and share a reasonable portion of previously undeclared assets, especially those that might have belonged to your late sister, we'd consider this resolved without further legal pursuit." I leaned back in my chair. "Previously undeclared assets?" Amelia folded her hands neatly. "We believe there may be some holdings, specifically a parcel of land near Lake Redmore, that was once under Clarice's name. Its value is considerable, and we just want to make sure everything is transparent." I finally opened the folder. Inside, neat paragraphs outlined what they considered amicable division of heritage-based holdings, with a suggested distribution of 35% to Peter and Amelia, contingent on my cooperation. I closed the folder. Then I turned to Calvin. "You said legal pursuit. What exactly are you pursuing?" "We're not pursuing anything yet," he replied, hands raised. "But there's concern that assets from your sister's estate were never properly declared in probate." I smiled politely. My sister's estate was handled privately, within the law, and with full counsel. Calvin hesitated. Still, the transfer of any major property, like the Redmore tract, would need public documentation. If that was circumvented, it wasn't. My voice was calm. The land was transferred years ago, lawfully, into a private trust under a foundation. It is no longer personal property, not mine, not subject to division, and certainly not your business. Calvin blinked. I saw the flicker of uncertainty. Amelia's mouth tightened. "Henrietta," she began, "we just want to help you protect your legacy before someone else steps in." I held her gaze. "You mean before I die?" She didn't respond. That silence told me everything. I reached for my water glass, took a slow sip, then stood, folding the folder closed and setting it gently back on the table. "If you want to sue me," I said, eyes locked on Calvin's, "you are welcome to try. But I suggest you bring someone older next time, preferably someone who remembers what integrity smells like." Amelia flinched ever so slightly. "And as for legacy," I continued, voice steady, "mine is not for sale in a backroom lunch meeting. It's being written right now by how I choose to respond to people who mistake silence for surrender." I looked at Amelia one last time. "There's still jam on your teeth from pretending to care. You should clean that up before your next performance." Then I walked out, the sound of my heels sharper than the click of a gavel. Outside, the sun was warm, and I breathed in, not like someone cornered, but like someone stepping fully into her own name again. It came on a Tuesday evening, the kind of evening where the rain taps gently on the windows like a forgotten memory. I was steeping chamomile when the doorbell rang, not the front door, but the side porch, where only couriers come. A young man in a waterproof jacket handed me an envelope stamped with the court seal. I opened it with steady hands. Notice of petition for conservatorship, filed by Peter Lawson and Amelia Lawson. Reason: exhibiting signs of memory loss, confusion, and high risk of financial mismanagement. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. They weren't just circling like vultures anymore. They were diving in. I sat down, the pages trembling in my lap, not from fear, but from something colder, something sharper. I dialed Judith. She picked up on the first ring. "Henrietta." "I got it," I said. "They went through with it." There was a pause. Then Judith's voice dropped into something steel-lined. That was their last move. Desperate, but also stupid. I traced the seal of the court with my fingertip. They're saying I'm senile, that I'm a danger to my own finances. "You've never missed a payment, never bounced a check," she said firmly. "You've had the same CPA for 15 years. You drafted your estate plan with 2 witnesses and a notary, and you've passed every cognition assessment I've asked for." "I still remember my childhood phone number," I said, half smiling. Judith didn't laugh. "We're going to respond. Not with outrage, not with drama, but with proof and precision and timing." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "Not with noise." But with the sound of a knock on the courtroom door the next day, I opened the wooden box Clarice had left me. Not the one with money or deeds, the one labeled Truth, etched into the underside. Inside were copies of our family's private documents, voice recordings, and journals. But more importantly, I had my own records too. I gathered everything. A dated and signed psychological evaluation from Dr. Neville, who had tested me twice annually for the last 3 years. No signs of cognitive impairment, receipts and transaction logs that showed consistent, rational financial decisions. I printed my journal entries too. I'd written every phone call with Peter and Amelia, each subtle manipulation, each moment that made me hesitate but didn't make me act. Until now. Then I retrieved the camera. It had been installed under the kitchen shelf, tiny, silent, motion-activated. I'd hidden it months ago during a conversation with Judith. Just in case, she had said. They try to twist your words. One file in particular caught my attention. A lunch visit 2 weeks ago when Amelia leaned in close over a piece of lemon tart and said softly, "If you really loved Peter, you'd sign the co-ownership forms. It's not like you're doing anything with that house anymore." Her smile was cruelly sweet. The video showed it all. The tone, the pressure. My silence. That night, I printed a transcript and burned the backup drive. I wanted to feel violated, but all I felt was focus. On Friday, I met Judith at her office. She laid everything out into labeled folders: medical, financial, audio, visual. We included the signed witness letter from my estate planner. We included a notarized letter from Dr. Neville stating, "At no time has Ms. Lawson displayed cognitive deficiencies that would impair her judgment or her ability to manage her estate." Finally, Judith looked at me. "You don't have to come to court," she said gently. "We can file this as a countersuit and leave it there." But I shook my head. "No, I want them to see me, standing, coherent, alive, not a document, not a rumor. Me." She smiled, the kind that only comes when your client becomes your friend. "We'll file on Monday." The hearing will be set shortly after I took one last look at the folder in front of me. All my life I had taught Peter about right and wrong, but somewhere along the way he must have decided that ambition meant rewriting the rules and rewriting me. But I wasn't a footnote in his narrative. I was the original author, and I had never stopped writing. I woke early before the sun. There was a quiet stillness in the air, the kind that reminded me of childhood summers before the heat took hold, before the day became too loud. I made tea, wrapped a shawl around my shoulders, and packed 2 things into my canvas bag, a folding wooden chair and Clarice's old fountain pen. Then I drove. The land looked the same as it always had, unfenced, vast, overgrown with late summer grass and patches of wildflowers that had found their freedom in the cracks of time. The lake shimmered in the distance like a secret. I parked beneath the crooked sycamore tree, where Clarice and I had once buried a metal box full of childhood promises. We had been teenagers then, still believing in forever, still thinking words could ward off betrayal. I unfolded the chair and placed it on the same spot she used to sit. There was still a faint dent in the earth where her heels had pressed into the soil, as if the land remembered her better than people did. I pulled the pen from my bag, opened my notebook, and began to write. To the sister I once believed I was smaller than, "You were always bigger in the world's eyes, bolder, louder, wealthier." But I never resented it. You didn't shrink me. You gave me room to grow. When the world turned its back on you, I stayed, not because I owed you, but because I understood you. This land, this patch of forgotten freedom, you gave it to me not for the money, but for the memory, for the quiet, for the choice to keep it sacred. I never told them about it, not because I feared them, but because I feared I'd lose what little of you I had left. Tomorrow I walk into court, not to fight, but to be seen. And if the world forgets you again, let this land be your voice. Let my silence become your legacy. I signed it, folded the paper in thirds, and placed it inside a small tin envelope. Then I walked to the base of the sycamore and crouched beside the hollow Clarice, once carved with a camping knife. We had called it our pact tree. It was where we once wrote, "No matter how loud the world gets, we will never betray each other in silence." I tucked the letter inside and whispered, "Still true." The wind picked up, brushing through the tall grass like fingertips combing gray hair. I stayed a while, breathing it in, letting the quiet rebuild me. When I finally returned home, the sun was tilting westward. Judith was already waiting in the sitting room, a neat leather folder on her lap. She stood as I entered. "Everything's ready," she said. "Affidavits, video recordings, medical reports, your estate planner's deposition, even a formal letter from Ivy's school principal, confirming your visits, your reading sessions, your donations, all dated and signed. I sat across from her and smiled softly. You didn't miss a thing. I couldn't afford to, she replied, then paused. But more importantly, neither could you. She slid the folder toward me. I opened it, skimming the labeled tabs, the notarized documents, the transcripts. It was all there, the architecture of a woman who had not only survived, but paid attention. Judith studied me for a long moment. You sure you're ready for this? I met her eyes. Judith, tomorrow they won't confuse me with the woman who cried quietly in the dining room, or the mother who nodded politely at betrayal, or the grandmother who bit her tongue. I closed the folder. Tomorrow they'll meet me. The courtroom was small, windowless, and deliberately neutral. Beige walls, beige carpet, beige curtains. I sat on one side, Judith beside me. Across the room sat Peter, Amelia, and a man I didn't recognize at first, later introduced as their attorney. He looked too polished for this place, as if he dressed for theater rather than truth. This wasn't a trial, just a closed hearing to evaluate their petition for conservatorship. But somehow, it felt heavier than any public courtroom I'd ever seen. It was quiet, tense, a place where words, once spoken, couldn't be taken back. The judge entered, an older woman with eyes like river stones, smooth but unshifting. She nodded at everyone, then looked at the stack of documents before her. Let's begin. Peter was first to speak. His voice trembled at the edges, as if he rehearsed concern but couldn't quite sell it. Your Honor, we're here today not out of malice, but out of love. My mother. She's become increasingly isolated. She avoids social events, declines visits, even refuses basic assistance. It's not about money, it's about safety. Amelia followed immediately like an echo with sharper edges. She has no live-in aid, no medical alert system, no close family contact, and there have been concerning spending patterns, donations to obscure causes, legal fees that don't add up. We worry that she may be manipulated or just not thinking clearly. Then came the attorney. A smooth tone, professional cadence. Based on interviews, submitted observations, and concern for Mrs. Lawson's well-being, we respectfully request limited conservatorship over financial decisions to prevent potential harm. This includes authority to co-manage liquid assets and assess holdings in undeclared properties for safety and legal compliance. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. The judge turned to me. Mrs. Lawson, do you wish to respond? I nodded gently. Yes, Your Honor. I've brought a few things. Judith handed me the folder. I opened it slowly, no drama, no need for emphasis, and slid the first document forward. This is an independent cognitive and psychological assessment from Dr. Selma Howard, completed 3 weeks ago. It confirms full mental clarity, stable memory function, and no signs of degenerative disease. The judge picked it up, read silently for a few seconds, then gave a slow nod. I continued. This is a 6-month bank statement. All transactions are accounted for. The donations they mention were made to Ivy's school and 2 local women's shelters, under my name and with full consent. Another pause. The attorney shifted in his chair. Amelia stopped making eye contact. And finally, I said, holding the flash drive between 2 fingers, a short audio file. Conversation recorded at my home. Roughly 2 weeks ago, I handed it to the court clerk, who inserted it into a speaker system. And then, we all listened. Amelia's voice came through unmistakably. You know, it doesn't have to be messy. If you're willing to transfer partial ownership of the property quietly, we don't have to involve legal proceedings. You'd still live comfortably. We could even set something up for Ivy to inherit. Honestly, Mother, you don't need the land. You need rest, peace. You've lived your life. Then came my own voice, clear, calm. You're asking me to trade silence for ownership. That's not peace. The recording ended. No one spoke, not Peter, not Amelia, not even their lawyer. The judge glanced over her glasses at them, then back at me. I took a breath. Then I said, simply, I never asked them for anything. Not money, not time, not favors. I only ever wanted a quiet evening with my granddaughter. I only ever wanted respect for the life I've lived and the choices I still have the right to make. I folded my hands, but now I do ask for the court's acknowledgement that I am fully capable of protecting myself, that I am not a woman to be sidelined, gaslit, or erased quietly for convenience. Peter looked at his shoes. Amelia stiffened like cold marble. The judge leaned forward. Mrs. Lawson, do you feel that your current situation endangers your well-being in any way? I smiled, sadly but with resolve. No, Your Honor. Not physically, but it endangers something else, my dignity, and that I intend to keep. The courtroom had never been so quiet. The judge took off her glasses, placed them gently on the bench, and looked straight at me, before shifting her gaze to Peter and Amelia. I have reviewed all submitted evidence, including the psychological evaluations, the financial records, and the recording. I find no basis for conservatorship in this case. Judith exhaled beside me, barely audible, but heavy with the weight of weeks. The judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, based on the audio presented and documents submitted under seal, I am ordering an inquiry into potential forgery of financial documents and unauthorized attempts to access private assets. She paused. The state will follow up with a formal investigation. Peter said nothing. He looked small, not just in stature, but in presence, like a boy who touched something he didn't understand and got burned. His shoulders curled inward, not in defense, but in surrender. But Amelia exploded. She stood so fast her chair screeched backward. This is ridiculous! That woman set us up. She baited us with silence. Her voice cracked at the end, the fury tipping into something rawer. Panic, perhaps. She turned to the judge, arms outstretched, as if the performance might save her. She planned all this. The recording, the paper trail. She trapped us like a fox hunt. I stayed seated, calm, whole. And when the judge raised her hand for silence, I met Amelia's eyes and said clearly, softly, it wasn't a trap. It was a boundary. And for the first time in my life, I placed it exactly where it belonged. Amelia froze. Just for a moment. Just long enough for me to see the disbelief in her eyes, the refusal to accept that I could outmaneuver her without ever raising my voice. She stormed out, her heels striking the floor like angry punctuation. Peter followed, slower, without looking back. The gavel came down once, echoing against the wood-paneled walls. The hearing was over, but for me, something else was just beginning. Judith leaned over, her voice a whisper. You okay? I nodded. More than okay. And I was. Not because I'd won. Not because the law had chosen truth over performance, but because I had finally stepped out of the role they wrote for me. The aging mother with fading memory, too gentle to resist, too lonely to fight. They thought silence meant surrender, but they never understood. I kept quiet to stay whole. And now they would live with the noise of their own choices. Outside the courthouse, the air was sharp with early fall. Leaves scuttled across the sidewalk like whispers too urgent to stay still. I didn't look for Peter or Amelia. I didn't care which car they got into, or if they spoke, or if they even blamed each other. It no longer mattered. What mattered was the stillness in my own chest. The space where fear used to sit now felt like freedom. It was exactly 30 days after the hearing when I decided to throw the retirement party I truly wanted. Not at the house with the manicured lawn and surveillance cameras, not at some banquet hall with white linens and strategic seating charts, and certainly not with people who smiled through their teeth. I chose a small, sun-drenched common room at the Marigold, an assisted living home for widowed women. Most had been forgotten by the children they raised, tucked away and rarely visited, but their eyes still held fire, some even sharper than Judith's. I had been quietly funding the home for months through the Clairhart Foundation. My name never appeared on the checks. Clarice would have liked it that way. The staff helped set up folding chairs, little vases of daisies, and pitchers of lemonade. There were finger sandwiches and peach cobbler, a record player with old jazz spinning in the corner. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. Judith arrived first. She brought a pie, store-bought, but her smile made up for it. "Is this your idea of retirement?" she asked, placing the pie beside the punch bowl. "No," I said. "This is my idea of coming home." Then came the others. Elaine in her pink cardigan, who once taught poetry before her son took her apartment and left her at the Marigold with 2 suitcases and no explanation. Nancy, with her cane and sharp wit, who used to be a school principal and now ran bingo nights like board meetings. And Lucille, who had outlived 3 husbands and still wore lipstick every day. And of course, Ivy. My granddaughter walked in, clutching a folded piece of paper and a tin of cookies wrapped in foil. Her hair was in 2 braids, and her socks didn't match. I didn't care. She was perfect. When everyone had taken a seat, I stood near the fireplace and cleared my throat. "I didn't plan on making a speech," I began, "because I've learned that silence often speaks louder. But today is different," I paused. "I want to thank each of you for showing up, not just today, but in your own lives, for continuing to be who you are, even when the world told you to fade." There were murmurs of appreciation, nods, a few teary eyes. "And," I continued, "for reminding me that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a woman choosing where to sit, who to trust, and what to carry forward." Then I turned to Ivy. "Sweetheart, would you like to read what you wrote?" She nodded, climbing onto the low stool we'd set beside me. She unfolded the paper, her little hands shaking slightly. Her voice was soft but steady. "Dear Grandma, I don't know much about land or money, but I know you're the only person who never lied to me. Not even once. You always tell me when the pie crust is burnt. You always tell me when you're tired. You even told me when you were scared, when you said you didn't know what would happen, but you were going to be brave anyway. That's how I know you're the strongest person in the room. I love you. Love, Ivy." There wasn't a dry eye. I pulled her into my arms and she nestled her head into my chest. I looked up and saw Judith wiping at her face, pretending it was the air conditioning. I laughed. It wasn't loud, but it was from a place in me that hadn't laughed in a long time. I raised my glass. Just lemonade. "Thank you for being here. For witnessing this chapter of my life. Not the dramatic courtroom, not the headlines that never came, but this. Quiet, steady joy." I scanned the room, pausing on each face. I thought I had to disappear to stay safe, but I was wrong. I just had to choose the right place and the right people. I took a sip, smiled again. I guess I've finally arrived. A little late, but right where I meant to be. The room burst into applause, gentle, honest, unforced, and in that moment, surrounded by women who had known betrayal, who had tasted loneliness and still chose connection, I felt something I hadn't in years: belonging. Clarice would have laughed. She always said I'd never slow down long enough to realize I was home. But I had, and I didn't need a mansion or a legacy to prove it. Just a chair, a glass of lemonade, and a granddaughter who knew the truth before the world ever tried to rewrite it. I returned home after the party, still holding the warmth of Ivy's words in my chest, like a keepsake. The house was quiet, as always, but it no longer felt like silence. It felt like space, a canvas waiting for new brushstrokes. I walked to the study, the one Clarice and I used to call the room with too many books and not enough time. I turned on the lamp. The soft golden light illuminated dust motes and shadows of old memories. I stood in front of the wall, safe behind the framed photograph of us at the lake, two sisters in sundresses holding lemonade, feet muddy from chasing dragonflies. With slow fingers, I spun the dial. The old lock clicked open with the sound of finality and rebirth. Inside lay the documents I had kept hidden from everyone, even Judith. First, I pulled out the contract. 7 years ago, I had officially transferred ownership of the lakefront land into the Clairhart Foundation. Clarice and Henrietta, our initials merged, our bond sealed in paper and purpose. No longer mine, no longer hers. It belonged to something bigger. The land had been quietly protected under that name for nearly a decade, tax-shielded, legally secure. No one could sell it. No one could inherit it. It was untouchable by greed, by manipulation, or by any version of Peter or Amelia that might rise again. Then came the real heart of it, the blueprint. I unfolded it across the desk, a full-scale architectural plan, complete with zoning permissions and budget forecasts, a women's healing and reintegration center designed for older survivors of financial abuse, counseling rooms, art therapy spaces, housing units with garden access, a library wing filled with donated books, and a lakeside path that curved like a gentle arm wrapping around the whole structure. Clarice had helped dream it up during her last year, back when people whispered that she had lost everything, but she hadn't. She had given it away, intentionally, silently, beautifully. Now it was my turn to speak. I sat down, clicked open my old laptop, and began typing the first official newsletter from the Clairhart Foundation. The header was simple: "We begin together." I started with a personal note, one I had written 100 times in my head but never dared put into words until now. To whom it may empower, I used to stay silent because I thought my story didn't matter, because I thought survival meant shrinking, because I believed that as women age, we fade into the corners unless someone pulls us out. But today, I write not to be heard, but to help others like me know this truth. We are not invisible. Not when we still have one another. This center is not just bricks and permits. It's a reclamation of dignity, a declaration that wisdom does not expire, that protection doesn't have to come from fear or isolation, but from community, autonomy, and love. My name is Henrietta Lawson. I was nearly erased by people I trusted most, but I held the pen, and I've written a new ending, and this is just the beginning. With gratitude and fierce hope, Henrietta, I clicked save and then send. The newsletter would reach over 300 early supporters, volunteers, therapists, and legal advocates who had quietly committed to this cause over the past few months. Most didn't know the full story behind the land. Now they would. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. No camera crew, no confetti, no revenge speech, just a woman at her desk, setting fire to shame with the click of a send button. I took one last look at the blueprint and whispered to Clarice, as if she were still sitting across from me, "We did it." We made it matter. I placed everything back in the safe. The documents, the blueprint, even the pen she had used to sign the trust deed. I closed the door, spun the dial, and smiled. I had protected what needed protecting. And now I would build, not in defiance, but in grace. Not to prove my worth, but to share it. Not for legacy, but for healing. Tomorrow, the foundation team would break ground by the lake. Ivy had asked if she could help plant the first tree. I told her yes. After all, roots begin in silence, just like power. The morning sun filtered through the soft haze that clung to the lake like a memory unwilling to let go. The grass was still wet from dawn's dew, and the air carried that clean, forgiving scent that only early fall could bring. I stood by the same patch of earth where my sister and I once made promises we thought would never have to be tested. The soil was darker now, softer, ready. Beside me was Ivy, in her denim overalls and sunflower-patterned gloves, cradling the young apple sapling in her arms like it was something fragile and sacred. In many ways, it was. "Is this the same spot you and Aunt Clarice used to sit?" she asked, looking up at me. I nodded. "Right here." We used to call it the quiet edge of the world. It felt like the whole lake listened to us, even when no one else did. We both knelt in the dirt. Ivy helped me dig the hole, her small fingers clumsy but determined. I guided her, steady and patient. She placed the tree in carefully, like she understood more than any child her age should. As we pressed the soil back around the roots, Ivy looked up again. Her voice was soft but certain. "Grandma, who owns this land now?" I paused, brushing a streak of dirt off her cheek. I looked around at the trees lining the lake, at the distant silhouette of the soon-to-be-built healing center, at the empty bench Clarice and I once called our court of dreams. "This land," I said slowly, "belongs to those who haven't given up hope. It belongs to people who still believe in rebuilding, even after they've been torn down." I turned to her fully, my voice tender. "And it can belong to you, too, if you promise to protect it. Not for money, not for power, but for love." Ivy didn't hesitate. She wrapped her arms around me and whispered against my shoulder, "I promise. But please don't leave me, Grandma." I held her tighter than I had ever held anyone, not because I was afraid she would slip away, but because I finally knew I wouldn't. "I never left, sweetheart," I whispered into her hair. "I was just quiet for a while." We sat like that for a long time, our arms and hearts tangled, the little apple tree standing tall beside us, its roots beginning a journey we might never fully witness, but had chosen to believe in anyway. And in that moment, everything Clarice and I had held onto, every unspoken vow, every whisper of strength buried under years of silence, took form in something alive, a new kind of legacy, one not measured in deeds or courtrooms or ledgers, but in shelter, in promises kept, in love passed down quietly, like seeds waiting patiently for spring. As Ivy played with the last clumps of dirt, I sat on the old bench by the lake and watched the sun break through the clouds. The light touched the water with a shimmer that felt like Clarice's laughter, like something lost returning without fanfare, only peace. I took a deep breath. I had spent so many years afraid to speak, to act, to take up space, but keeping quiet, when done with purpose, had become my armor, my shield, my soil. And now I had chosen what to plant in it, an orchard of second chances, a foundation for others like me, and one little girl who still believed a tree could change the world. I kept quiet. Thank heavens I did, because silence, when planted right, becomes shelter for more than just yourself. Before we say goodbye, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let me know in the comments. I read every one with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today, wherever you are. I hope you carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care. We'll see you in the next story.